Hello, welcome back to everyone, to you, to us. We have Dave again, and welcome back to Kent Carlson.
Good to be here.
It's good to be here. It is good to be here.
Good to have you, Kent.
What?
As you were,
I
good
said,
to have you.
How do you like my glasses?
I don't like your glasses at all. I mean,
What?
some people could, I don't know. It's number one, the contrast between your hair and the glasses, it's too close. I don't like that. It's just, I think a darker glasses would be, if you were out, weren't doing this thing because people need to see your eyes, but I think the sunglasses would be cool. The contrast with the white hair. But the white hair and the white glasses, it's how I would describe it is that you're trying too hard. I mean, you're just trying too hard. And so I think kind of act your age a little bit. And,
He doesn't know how to do that.
No,
Yeah.
I don't know how to do that, but I just will forget.
Did you stop at a store and say, look at those glasses? You said, those would look cool on me. Did you actually have that thought in your
No,
head?
I couldn't find my black glasses, and I got these for $2 at dollar store, and so, but I knew you would give me crap, so that's what I love.
He wore them on purpose.
And your glasses, by the way, Red, are they Diane's glasses?
Red.
Nick?
When you're those kind of distinctions are important to me. You know, I think.
I mean, this is, I think, the longest intro we've ever had,
Yeah,
and
maybe
the most horrible.
I love this.
If you listen beyond the glasses intro, we commend you. So now is when we're going to start.
We should do a Zoom thing on fashion. Just cut out all this church stuff and let's just do a fashion thing.
That's a great idea. Let's start
Kent
right
and
now.
I would be like really good at that. Go ahead, Kent. Annika, take over.
Okay, part 2 of our conversation, we are talking about church. We're talking about things that don't move. We're talking about things that have changed and shifted in our culture, and what as Christians and believers we do about that, and what are the things that we can hold on to, and the truth amidst an ever-shifting culture. Actually, a culture that has been shifting for quite a long time. It's just that now more of us are awake and aware of what is actually happening. We keep talking about the church now as playing without their queen, which we've been referring to that as kind of this Sunday service, and even just our buildings to gather in. We don't have that as our resource right now as we knew it. And so what does it look like for these community of believers to continue to be communities of believers? So we brought Kent Carlson in on this conversation for our last episode, and we're so intrigued and thankful for the wisdom that he brings. We wanted to continue, and we liked his glasses. So we wanted to continue that conversation here. So ultimately, to you, Kent, we want to say, what are some practical next steps for the church? What can the church do? What are the new ways that we can embrace the reality of what's happening? And how can we continue to make disciples?
Well, thanks. That's a great question. I'm actually glad you want to drill down a little bit into details. I felt like even last time, and many of the times when we're talking on these kinds of things, we live up in the stratosphere, gray, big generalities of what could be. And that's important, I think, when you're trying to cast a vision, increase our imagination for what the church could become. So we're trying to paint this picture, this vision, and you learn how to live into that. But ultimately, it is the living into it, not in the grand scheme, 30,000 feet, but it's in the details of life at home during quarantine with little children, and in the midst of a discussion, a conflict, a debate during a leadership team meeting, an elder board meeting, a deacon meeting, or any team meeting that someone has. And the standard thing we have in our country, or not just our country, I think in the world, is when we come to these discussions, what we bring is the tools that we have, and sometimes they are not the tools that are needed. The tools we have is strategic thinking and decision making, and arguing out the points. And those who have the stronger points sometimes wins, sometimes just bullies win, and various power structures take place. And so I think it's good for us to step back and to reflect for a while when we think about who the church can become. at the core, I think we have to live into the importance of the leadership being spiritually mature. Now, I know everyone agrees with that, but my job is traveling around North America and sometimes overseas, where I'm running into regularly leadership teams and churches that actually have been fighting for sometimes decades, have never resolved issues, and the community around them know that. And pastors go to these places, get chewed up and spit out. Sometimes they bring the problems with as well. And so we're not able to lead in that way. And so Dallas Willard has this fascinating little phrase where he says, the most important thing, now I'll use a leadership team in this context, the most important thing the leadership team brings to the church is the people they are becoming, the community of leaders they are becoming. Why? Because that's what everybody sees. That's what gets reproduced. And that's what people will trust. Now, if all that's true, that the most important thing we bring to the church is the people we're becoming, first we have to embrace that that's true, because many of our seminary educations and our educational process, training processes, kind of put a value on how good a Bible exegete you are, how good a speaker, preacher you are, how good a team builder are you, how well do you run the services of the church, administrator, how well do you care for the people in the church and shepherd. All those things are marvelous gifts and skills and training that we need. But we're saying that underneath that, the most important thing is the person and the people we are becoming, because that's what everyone sees, that's what gets reproduced, that's what people will begin to trust. If all that is true, then the most important thing we need to learn how to do as a leadership team is to live in such a way so that our lives are resulting in increased contentment, a kind of a contagious joy, and a deepening confidence in God in the details of our lives. And so that's what we're after. Now, the problem is, and I think, and I'll pause for a second here, but I think it'd be fun to take a test case right now and to think about, how does leadership lead during this time of COVID-19 quarantine restrictions and reopening? I only have my current experience that I'm working with mostly is in California, which is still under heavy restrictions. I know other places in the Midwest are opening up at this point, but still churches in California, churches throughout the United States are having conflict right now in terms of what do we do? Do we go against the restrictions that are on us in our community? Or if restrictions are lifted, do we go meet again? How do we do it? Under what conditions? And how do we have that actual discussion? And what typically happens is people come to the discussion with their ideologies intact already. Their views of what ought to be done firmly implanted in their brains. And so what happens when we come together and we resemble sometimes in our meetings a Facebook post where people are just lobbing their talking points, whatever they get from their news source, and half-baked ideas, pseudoscience, fear, all these other things start coming out, and we're just trying to beat the other guy, win. And we create we have this antagonism, and and the COVID restrictions and the coming out of them becomes the kind of place where these dysfunctions show themselves. They don't create it. They were already there. A good friend of mine talks about the church as like a tube of toothpaste. And when the conflict comes and you start to get the squeeze, well, what comes out is what is already in there.
Right.
So the question is, how do we become a different kind of people? What does it look like to negotiate that territory well? So let me just pause for a second, because I know I'll just ramble too much. And I don't know if you guys, because I want to talk, I think it'd be good for us to go into detail of what happens in a meeting like that. But let me just pause and you guys jump in or push back or accuse of heresy or whatever.
Man, as is always the case, I wanted to jump back 3 paragraphs ago or 2 sentences ago. You are a thought virus machine. I think I mean, when you're talking, Kent, I'm actually wanting to do a shout out to the elders at Open Door, because whatever they're doing well or not, I know that their highest value, this is just our church, who cares, is who they are becoming, and listening to the voice of God. When the last time we talked, Kent, you talked about governing boards and leadership teams that are looking for the latest and the greatest method to make the church grow, but very, very little culture is built to develop a people who are listening to the voice of God, listening to those rhythms of God. And I mean, that just demands a different kind of,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I think you want me to jump on that?
Go.
Jumping right into the midst of that. If it's not, I mean, obviously we need to strategize, because to not be strategic is to be random, probably. So you have to make choices based on some kind of strategy, and decisions have to be made. So I'm not speaking against the importance of strategy or decision making. It's just that when that is foundational or primary, we don't even need God in those situations. And to sometimes we need to be spiritually formed. We just argue it out, the winner wins, and we go on our way. Right.
Yep.
And so the question is, how we do these things is far more important usually than the end result. And so I use 4 words on this, and I'll just emphasize 2 of them because we don't have time to go into everything. But the first word is engage. We have to show up at these meetings in all our glory, with all our opinions, all our energy. In some discernment circles, there's a little kind of flavor of passivity, and not in the best circles or when those circles are at their best, but sometimes it drifts in. And those of us who kind of live with a little energy and juice and assertiveness and opinions and such, we feel like left out a little bit because I can't show up. But I think it's crucially important that we show up, that we engage, we have our feelings, we present those feelings, even assertively at times. The problem comes is when the world does not bend to our will. And so what do we do then? Do we double down? Do we try to do a kind of violence and force ourselves on other people, either through fast talking or just not shutting up? And we begin to realize something in us is stirring. And then the other word that I would use, the negative word I would use, is that we become ultimately attached to these views that we have. They have to be followed. And then we get a passion at that point where the passion is somewhat at like a number 7 reaction to a number 3 infraction. And that 4 differential, that's me. Why is that so important? Why am I threatened here? What insecurities are coming up? What inadequacies am I feeling? So the level of self-awareness has to begin to come in, and ultimately a process of learning. This is the second most important word. If the first one is engagement, the second one is detachment. I have to become detached from my will. I have to abandon outcome. Using Ignatian terms, I have to learn to be indifferent to my will, which for guys like me, and Dave, I think you as well, Enneagram, you're an 8, which means you score high on the jerk scale sometimes. And so
I'm so proud of that. Anyway.
Right. And the idea of having a will and then being indifferent to it is absurd in my mind. I mean, what's the point of having a will if you don't make sure your will is, obeyed or pursued? But this is what makes it different. This is when Jesus said to his disciples that this is how they do it in the world. The Gentiles lord it over each other, but not so with you. Whoever wants to be great must be the least, and first will need to be last. And we do that by simply coming to the place where I actually submit my will to my sister or brother in their will. Even if I'm pretty certain that it's the right way to go, I still live with it.
Yeah.
Sure.
No, I'm just going to make trouble, because submit my will. Like, what if you're submitting your will to an idiot?
That's exact, because it's easy. It's a lot easier to submit your will to someone who's smarter than you, which for you and I is like everybody we work with. But, but it is those times when we are submitting ourselves to something that we feel is
wrong,
is going to be harmful. But still, it is because we believe that there is a God who is ruling this universe. I do not have to get my way. And what is most important, that is that I never violate the will of another human being by my forcefulness. I never do power over. I simply leave this in God's hand. This does call to the importance of developing leadership teams that are spiritually mature. When you have a team of 8 people and 3 of them don't know their junk, aren't aware that 8 reaction to the number 2 infraction, that 6 differential that is making a mess there, that makes for a difficult team. And so that's why leadership teams have to be primarily oriented around who they actually are, which requires the learning of a great trust in God and awareness of my identity here in Christ. My life is hid with Christ and God, and my in Christ I am complete. We learn this deeply, and we learn to trust each other, and we trust that people are going to own their stuff, even as best as we can in the moment. And when we don't, we screw up in a meeting, we come back the next week and we clean up. We share the story of what was going on inside me, and we just confess the fact that we are an idiot.
Right.
And
I've done that way too many times, but
well, yeah, you've had a lot of practice. So
I have had a lot of practice.
That's have I. And so I think so when we bring up the COVID-19 restrictions and entering back, this is not so important that you don't have to follow these guidelines of spiritual leadership. We actually have to come together, and the process has to happen where we become indifferent to our will. And people who have not done this ever, or rarely, not done that internal work, this is really difficult. And it becomes job one for the leadership team over the next year. I actually work with leadership teams in Canada and the United States, and I have a year-long process that we go through that is retreat-based, that is formationally based, that is understanding true self, false self issues, attending to my junk, knowing each other's story, narrative, and entering into that deeply so that we can become a team that does this out of who we actually are. When you squeeze the toothpaste, beauty comes out, because that's who we actually are. And it's kind of hard to do it in the moment.
Right. Well, let me just come back, and I'm not going to add anything. I just want to underline something when you said that in this era of COVID-19, that this is job one. And I just love that. And I don't, this formation of men and women who are in leadership, listening to the voice, becoming indifferent to their own will. That job one is not filling the seats again. Job one is not, how do we get them to all come back? I mean, maybe that'll happen, maybe it won't. But job one is what you're talking about. That's why it feels like this conversation is so, I'm just really grateful. I'm going to send it to all the elders and churches.
Well, you can imagine.
Yeah.
You can imagine when a church family is knowing this is going on, the kind of safety that comes in, the kind of respect, the kind of sense of we can be real, but we are going to guard the spiritual maturity and the health of the church. We don't all have to agree. We live in a world that is all about taking sides right now. We're so incredibly divided in so many ways, and things we don't even care that much about sometimes. We're tribal. It's like you're living there in Minnesota, and it's like you're a Bears fan, and you got everyone in your church, most people in church, Viking fans, and you're arguing with each other. It has nothing to do with whether the Bears are good or the Vikings are good. It's just your team, and you're just cherry picking stats to show that you're right. And there's no real, like, which you shouldn't with sports teams. I mean, the Bears are the best football team on planet Earth. And
Well,
so there's no arguing for that. But
yeah, but go ahead.
no. And so, but that's what we do with these kind of even spiritual decisions or discussions or cultural ones. We're tribal. We are, we don't love in the moment. We don't recognize this is another precious human being in front of me, a sacred creation of God. And I am seeing them just as a means to my end of get my way. They're either a means to my end or they're an obstacle to me. And I don't actually, I'm not present with them as another human being. But to become that kind of person it takes a tremendous amount of effort. And that is the goal of formation, is to become the people, using a Willardian phrase, who routinely and easily live their lives as Jesus would if he were them.
Yeah. What I love about this conversation, I mean, beyond the fact that it's three of us talking about church and we're self-professed church geeks, but what is so poignant about this is that this isn't just about church governance and whether churches are going to come back together eventually,
right.
And our burning desire to be back with our communities, although those things are right and good. This is about who are the people we're becoming. Are we bringing our best self when we're being squeezed in the other situations in our lives? So the good news for the church here is we can work on our transformation without being in our church building. What's the kind of person that you're becoming, and how are you bringing that to your marriage? What's the person you are becoming, and how are you bringing that as you're trying to teach your kids? These are questions I'm asking. I'm not bringing a very good version of myself a lot of my days. You could ask my kids. They'll tell you. You could ask my husband. He'll tell you. So are we working? Are we opening our lives up to God to do that really hard work?
And by the way, Kenty, the way she's talking right now, it's not the only reason, but it's one of the big reasons. I love this lady.
Oh,
yeah.
No,
Keep
awesome.
talking, Annika. I'll shut up now.
That's just the reason why we're talking about these things that don't move, because this is something that doesn't move.
Yep.
So
what's the person you're becoming?
So I think, Annika, then how do we take this in the practical moments? Is because some people watching this may be leading an elder board team or being a part of the elder board team coming up, or a church staff situation, or it could be a marriage conflict people are having, or a ministry team at church. You're coming in, and what we have to train our people to do in the moment is to, and this might be a weird way of saying it, but we have to learn to talk about talking. We have to, as best as we can in the moment, to recognize, hey, what's happening right here? Where is all this stuff coming from? We think it's the thing we're discussing, but it's not. It's not actually. There's some other stuff going on here. And so we can learn to ask questions. You seem really agitated right now. Can you talk a bit about what's going on in your life, both in this discussion and maybe just at home right now? Because you're bringing a lot of juice, and actually you've kind of talked over several people here. And so let me hear
what's behind that.
Yeah, what are you carrying today? Because
right.
we love you. You're a part of this. Now, again, you got to trust the other person to begin to say thank you for that. It's the and we learn that we're moving ahead in formation when we can do this stuff in real time. The sports terminology, since we use football earlier, is when the game slows down, when a rookie quarterback comes in, and I'll just talk badly about us. When we got a Trubisky coming in who seems in over his head sometimes, with the most defenses being thrown at him, and he's panicking and he overthrows and those things, and the announcer will say the game's moving too fast for him. We bring in a veteran quarterback who has the skills and has been around for a while. Just take a Joe Montana. The stories are told about him in the Super Bowl. They're down a touchdown and they're coming back, couple of minutes left, 2-minute drill, trying to win the game. And he's got his team together in huddle. And he says, you guys look over there on the 50-yard line, other side of the field. There's John Candy in the front row. And it's like the whole world is watching him. The biggest game in everyone's adrenaline is going crazy. And he's talking about a celebrity in the first row that he sees. The game is slowing down. Time moves at the same pace for Trubisky and Montana. But when you're able to, in the moment, slow the game down, you can notice what's happening. You just notice. I just talked over that person. I wasn't listening to that person because I was so anxious for him to get done or her to get done so I can bring up my next point. And when we're beginning to be aware of that, we can tell on ourselves. We can what this does, because I don't mind the person having all that energy and wanting to share. We need that energy. But when we misbehave, we also have to be aware of the fact that something else is going on. And so I think in our teams, we can actually learn how to do this in real time. But we have to kind of set up the playing field that said, here are some of the rules. We're never bullies.
Yep.
We never overpower a person's will. We are, when we're talking, when Dave is talking about discernment, hearing the voice of God, there really is no way, and I'll just say this boldly or bluntly, there's no way to hear the voice of God when our will is preeminent. We actually have to be indifferent to my will in order to hear not only the voice of God, but perhaps more immediately, the voice of the person next to me.
Incredible.
And so that's the work.
I think this is such a beautiful spot to transition, if you guys don't mind, into this analogy that you have used, Dave, and then something that we've talked about before we started recording, Kent, a question that came on our previous discussion. And Dave, you talking about kind of what is the role of the church now? We've talked about what the first steps are for the church, should we say, or first steps for us. What's the way that we're going to show up in the world? And speaking authentically and bringing our most transformed self. You talked about telling on yourself, but Dave, this idea of the church becoming the locker room, and this is an analogy that you've used actually for probably a couple of decades, but the locker room and the church being a place to heal, support, and provide instruction. So what are some ways that we as attenders, people that are part of a community, how do we start to shift our thinking, and how do we start to engage in our churches in a new way? And how do us as, practitioners provide healing, support, and instruction?
Yeah, that's a metaphor I've used for years, and it's coming off of a letter that you got that from a wonderful person at Open Door. What I think right now is that because of the restrictions that are placed upon us because of the COVID thing, the whole locker room metaphor is hopefully more significant and workable than it ever was before. But the whole point is that the locker room is not where we play the game. All these metaphors keep mixing up, because what I think Ken was talking about was creating, when you talk about leadership who are indifferent to their own will, you're talking about developing leaders, i.e. coaches, who know how to lead a team, listening to the voice of God. And that gives me hope for the future. And I just think that whole locker room thing might be for another episode, because what Kent gave relative to developing leaders, the way he did, is enough for now. That's what I think. No, seriously, I don't want to. I think more talking would take away from what he already said. And I'm telling you, I'm serious. I'm thinking of several pastors and churches that I want to send this to, because I think it will be a great encouragement to them, not a confrontation, because they want to do what you're talking about, Ken. They care about this.
Well, I've worked with before I work with a church, a pastor on the board, I have to meet with the board typically, and I have to tell them what we're actually going to do. And I ask each one individually, I have to see, I want this. And I've had pastors say, yeah, my board isn't probably going to want to go on those 2 retreats and then read this series of books, and because they're all busy, and I get that. They all got day jobs. And I say, okay, that's fine. Then probably it's not a good time at this point. She says, well, come anyway. So I come and I visit. And as we're talking, it was over a meal. beginning to do a little of this picture what it means to be a team together, hearing the voice of God, loving each other. There are many boards, church boards, that meet just like a couple hours once a month, some even less than that. And none of the children of the other board members' kids' pictures are on their refrigerator. They don't know them well. They don't actually know what they're carrying. And they're just coming in, making decisions, administrative decisions. It's a job. No, they're beautiful people. They want more. But what the system is that they enter into, and the system helps form it, the people who are coming. But in this, a couple of situations, I'm talking to the elders in this, and I'm just going around, what do you guys think? And this one elder just started crying, not like ugly crying, but tears are coming to his eyes, and he's
snot. Was there snot?
Not shoulder heaving, snot dripping crying. It was kind of a
manly cry.
Manly cry, a catch in your voice, that kind of thing.
Okay. Good.
You got it? And,
I got it.
That's at the retreats where the ugly crying happens.
Yes, actually. I know. I've been there. I am the ugly crier.
But this guy says, this is what I always thought leadership in the church was going to be like. This is what I hunger for. But I just figured, well, it's just this, getting together, making decisions. But my soul longs for this. Pastors, leadership teams, the sincerity level is off the charts.
Yep.
People hunger for God, hunger for reality, hunger for truth. But our systems are so strong around us. They shape us. And the way of Jesus actually still is a radically different way. And some things have to be abandoned. Sometimes efficiency, making all the decisions, getting things done. We may need to realize that the point of the elder board is not to make all those decisions. You farm them out. And the elder board has to increasingly, or whatever leadership team you have, increasingly carry the spiritual weight of the church, taking the temperature of the church, what's going on, and set that temperature, be the thermostat, actually. And I think obviously, again, being a church geek, I know all the work it takes to keep the church running. I get all that, and those things have to be done. But again, I know boards that have never had conversations deeply about what's going on inside, because there's just not enough time, and the system doesn't honor that. So I think leaders of teams have to begin to paint a picture of a different way of doing it. Some will rebel against it, some won't want it, and those people have to very politely and kindly, over a period of time, sometimes several years, say, you got a good run, but this is probably not the place for you.
Yeah. But I agree with you. I think there are many people who are very, very thirsty for it. And thanks for this. This is driving me crazy. I have a number of people I want to send this to, just because, not to confront them and say, oh, do it this way, but it'll encourage the heck out of them. Because what you're talking about is what they want.
And I think, and this is kind of weird, this is like Sunday school stuff we learned in, kindergarten, but there actually is a God. And what we have to do is figure out how to do church in such a way where his voice is heard. And you only do that by making space for that. And you only do that by getting out of the way. Still showing up again. I don't want to have any kind of passivity encouraged here, because the one we talked about the word engagement, and then attachment, where you get too attached, and disengage, and learning how to detach, where I abandon outcome. The other way of doing it is you disengage and you don't show up anymore. So you want people to show up with their energy, their passions.
Yeah.
But now what do I do? What do I do with this? And you can't really grow in this without a spiritual maturity beginning to come over you. And I think, Dave, you've talked about this often, that all spiritualities at the end are about learning how to let go. All spiritualities are about learning how to release. There is nothing helpful in the spiritual life when we cling to our way. It doesn't help us. And so that's the deep soul work that should be happening in leadership teams.
Yep.
Yeah, and not just church leadership teams, but leadership teams across the board, right?
Yes.
And not just leadership teams, but
My son-in-law.
hi, Hayne, but
Hey,
but moms.
And Dave, you're right.
Kent?
Yeah.
I told you he was.
Yeah.
That's why he's strangely attracted to me.
He's
I don't
better
know
looking
what-
than you are.
Oh no.
It wouldn't take much. Go ahead. Wrap it up, Annika.
I'm trying. We can never add a fourth person.
No, that was
Not of your caliber. Your two calibers. I think I was just going to say just the beauty of what you're setting up here, this engagement, detachment, and submission, and bringing the people that we are becoming. It's, again, like I said, about halfway through, it's really about how are you bringing that person? Are you doing that in other areas and facets of your life, not just in your leadership, not in your church governance, not in the participation of your church, but you have to start right where you're at. And for a lot of us, that's our homes and our jobs. It's our neighborhoods. And if you're not starting there, it's not going to have that ripple out effect into the other places of our faith that are more visible. It's the greatest challenge of my life. And I think a lot of our lives too. And that also is the hope that we have. We feel this panic when we start to let go and detach from our will. And what that really is, it's not a detachment like we like to use that word detachment. It's actually a deeper engagement into what God is doing.
Yep.
And there's way more hope and strength and peace in any of that than the letting go of the outcome that we thought we wanted. So
good word.
thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Talk to us. Let us know what you're thinking, or don't. Good to be together. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you all
Kenny.
soon. Thanks, Kent.
Good seeing you guys.
Yep. Love you.